Hi, thanks for joining me today. Today I'm going to do several book reviews. I've been reading a lot, and one thing I noticed with this batch of books is that I really covered a variety of subjects, and so you're going to see a full range of the kind of books that I am interested in. My main interest on this channel is art. I also am interested in other subjects like history and novels and more. So as I said, you're going to see that today. So the first book I read was this one by the Medici. This one is by G.F. Young, the Medici. As you can see, it's an older book. It's a modern library though, which is usually pretty good quality, and it's a history of the Medici family, and it's a very good read. It's a very good primer for the Medici. The author, he says he's a Colonel G.F. Young. He has a military sense of organization, and he lays out the family. There's basically two branches of the Medici, and he goes through each one. In the back, there's a large chart of all the names that he's covering, and the parents and the child and the grandchild, and I think it's about 5 generations of Medici. Two significant things that he means to establish at the beginning, and he proves, is that there are people who criticize the Medici for some of the cruel things that individuals did when they were in power, but he points out when you consider the whole family and the many generations, he points out that it is a small percentage of the Medici who were cruel people and misused power. But the majority were, some of them were average and some of them were way above average. So, and one of the things I really like about it was he points out how, consistently the Medici family, of course they were into banking and money, but they spent a lot of their time building the city of Florence. Designing, hiring artists and artisans to build the churches and the buildings and the gardens and make sculptures and make paintings. And so when you one of the things that really struck home for me in this book is that Florence is a city in Italy. Today it has like 360,000 people. It probably wouldn't be very popular if it weren't for all the art and all the architecture and all the history and all the famous people who were there. So the gift that the Medici family gave to Florence and Italy is just so enormous and still reaps benefits today for the country of Italy. So he sets out to prove that, and he does prove that, and so that's what's impressive about this. So I will probably read some more later on about them, and I saw some other channels on YouTube where people mention Renaissance books, and I am interested in that. So I like this one. The next one is a very different type of book. When I was in Boston last year, I went to the Harvard bookstore, and upstairs they sell new books, and then downstairs they have a great section of used books and many classics. On the sale table they had this book, which is Bambi by Felix Salten. So for me, I don't really this is not my territory, but I was kind of in a humorous mood, and I was surprised because this is an NYRB book, and I thought, wow, they have good taste, so this is probably well written and worthwhile reading. And so I thought, I'm going to test their quality and read this book. And I liked it. This is a very good book. Of course, it's really more for teenagers, but it sets out a good, simple story. The atmosphere is very well done. Characters are well done, and it really proceeds well. And it's kind of an enjoyable read. After I read it, I decided to watch the film by Walt Disney from 1942. And wow, the film was really impressive. The adaptation from the book is pretty spot on. For 1942 for Walt Disney to have risked so much for this story. It really meant a lot to him and Disney, and wow, they did such a great job. They won some Academy Awards, I think, for sound and maybe one of the songs. But the animation was just outstanding, and he really proved the value of animation. And one of the things about it is the film was made with such love and such care and heart. It really comes through when you watch it. The scenes, the story's good, but the visuals, the atmosphere of the forest is amazing, and the weather in the forest and the seasons in the forest. It leads with its heart. A lot of films today that I watch, they're technically perfect, but they're missing a heart. A lot of films that I dislike, often the reason is that the technicians seem to have overridden the people with the heart who made the film, and so that's one thing that I thought about when I saw this. I also thought about Walt Disney as an artist and how he raised cartoons to the level of art and raised art to a corporate level. And it is kind of interesting how he did that, because we usually think of artists as individuals, and he really made art a corporate thing where it's so many contributors to making art, because it just says it is a great work of art. Bambi, the film. Sometimes I see it on these lists for treasured films. I fully accept that Bambi deserves to be on the list of treasured films in America. Okay, the next one I read was this novel by Sinclair Lewis. This is It Can Happen Here. Now, this has been mentioned on BookTube, and so I have read one Sinclair Lewis novel, Main Street, which I liked a lot. This is the second book I have read by Sinclair Lewis. This was written in the 30s. And one thing you should know about the 1930s is there were a lot of socialists and there were some communists in the United States. And so there was a real fear that fascism could take over the United States. And so the fact that he, imagine this whole scenario where a man runs for the presidency and wins the presidency and becomes a fascist was really amazing at that time, really very provocative at that time. And some people think that that's even possible today. And it's always kind of possible that it could happen in America. I think that it was much more likely in the 1930s because Hitler was popular in the 1930s before World War II. As relevant today, I see it. It's a good imaginative book. But the problem I had with, I didn't really like any of the characters too much. I didn't like this main character, Jessup. The main character, Jessup, I liked him sort of at the beginning, but then then he kind of became self-righteous in a way that annoyed me. I don't know, I just didn't like him. It'd take me, I can't really figure out why, but right now, and maybe I'll figure it out later on if I think about it, but the only one who was kind of an interesting character was this Shad LaRue, I think his name was. He worked for Jessup, and as the fascists took power, he became powerful, and so he was kind of an interesting character. So there were, as what I'm trying to say is that it's an interesting idea. He carried it out, but as a great novel, it's short of a great novel. It's a good novel. There are many other novels that are better than it, but at the same time, it depends on where you are and what your interests are that this would appeal to you. The next book I read was, this one is called lectures by Roger Fry, and this has the treasured Brattle Book Shop sticker on it. It's just $3 book. I don't know if you're new to Roger Fry. He was a kind of on the Bloomsbury group. He was older than them, but he was associated with them, and he was an art critic, and he was a painter and author. He wrote a book about Paul Cézanne, which I own, and Virginia Woolf wrote a biography of Roger Fry, and I have read her biography of Roger Fry, and I really enjoyed it. So this book, it's lectures on art, and it's different periods of art. He talks about important things in art like sensibility, vitality. Then he goes through different civilizations of art: Chinese art, Greek art, African art, and he has a lot of illustrations. He does pottery, he does painting, he does tiles, I believe, sculptures. If you're interested in art, it's a good primer, and I like all of his observations about art. He has a great eye on art, so I read this in a very slow manner. I read the chapters while I was reading other books, so I'm glad I read this one. The last book I read is this one. It's called Bitten. It's The Secret History of Lyme Disease and Biological Weapons by Kris Newby. And this one is more of a journalistic type book. She has a personal journey with Lyme disease, where she had Lyme disease and her husband had Lyme disease, and so it kind of reads like a mystery. Now, it does get very scientific at parts, but she follows this scientist named Willy Bergdorfer. He experimented with ticks and injecting ticks with diseases. And so her premise that she sets out to prove is that Lyme disease was a biological weapon that was accidentally released into the environment. She goes through a lot of stuff, basically proves it. She proves it well enough for me. I'm not sure all the other legal ramifications of Lyme disease, but I'm on board with what she's saying. I haven't read any criticisms of her, but I do believe that it is possible that a biological weapon could be released by accident. And, you know, I kind of have followed that story as far as COVID. And so that's part of what brought me into this book. And so that's a good book. I recommend that. And so those are the books I had. As you see, it's a lot of different types of books. When I was younger, I used to criticize myself for going on so many different directions, but then I got used to it. That's just the way I am. And I hope you can appreciate that. And I'll see you in the next video.